Welcome to the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, episode number 329. It's the possibility of having a dream come true that makes life interesting. Paulo Coelho.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, my Indie Film Hustlers, to another episode of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Today's show is sponsored by Industry Jump. Industry Jump is a global community of verified filmmakers providing the next generation of filmmakers with the resources required to grow their businesses, learn new skills, and manage their careers. You can sign up for free. You can even create a verified portfolio, search for film crew to hire for your next projects, and learn from top-tier creators in the industry through live video mentoring. So if you want to check this out, guys, head over to industryjump.com. Today's show is also sponsored by Blackbox. Blackbox is a new platform and community that is all about financial freedom for filmmakers like you. If you join Blackbox, you will be transformed from being a worker to being a maker of your own content. And you'll be making steady passive income from the global market. Blackbox currently allows you to upload your stock footage once, get it to many global agencies, and then allows you to share that passive income stream with your collaborators. Whether you want to submit old footage that's been sitting around in your hard drives or create brand new content, Blackbox is for you. It's really quite revolutionary. With Blackbox, filmmakers can concentrate on making great content while Blackbox takes care of all the business BS. Just visit www.blackbox.global to find out more. Now, before we get started, I do want to let you know that I have been working on something crazy in the Indie Film Hustle Lab. It is a huge deal. It's probably one of the biggest things I've done for the tribe since launching Indie Film Hustle. That's how big it is. It's bigger than shooting for the mob. It's bigger than one of my movies. It's a big thing, guys, and I cannot wait to share it with you. I am in the midst of building it and putting it all together for you, and I can't wait for you guys to see it. So keep an eye out on social media, on the podcast as well, that I'll be talking about what is coming. So just prepare yourselves, because I think you guys are going to like it. Now, today on the show, we have easily one of the bravest filmmakers I have ever had the pleasure of meeting. His name is Benjamin Gilmour. He's an Australian writer-director who made the film Jirga. Now, what makes his story interesting is not only that he shot the whole movie with basically a two-man crew, that he purchased the Sony A7s Camera that he shot the whole movie with, because that's the only thing he had access to at the time, and that the screenplay that he had was being constantly rewritten on a daily basis. Oh, and did I also mention that he shot the entire movie in Afghanistan? Yes, that's right. He actually shot his entire film in Afghanistan while there's a war going on. It is insane what he was able to do, and it never ceases to amaze me, the power of drive and hustle and someone's passion to make their film under the craziest circumstances you can imagine. So I wanted to have Benjamin on the show so he could tell us his story. Tell us, and by the way, his stories are insane. Some of the stuff that he has to deal with while making this movie, where he is almost abducted, he is almost killed, and he was obviously a big target, being a white Australian man in the Afghani desert. It's just remarkable, his stories. But I also want to say before we get to the interview, is anyone listening to this, I don't want to hear an excuse about, I don't have this to make my movie, or I need that to make my movie, or this or that. It doesn't matter. If there's a will, if there's a passion, if there's a story that you need to tell, you can do it. Please use Benjamin as an example and what he was able to do with his film. Oh, and by the way, his film was also the official submission from Australia to the Oscars foreign film category, just as a side note. So without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Benjamin Gilmour. I'd like to welcome to the show Benjamin Gilmour, brother. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Alex. My honor.
You are in a rainforest right now somewhere in East Australia, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite different to, where I shot the film we're going to talk about today, but I live up in a part of Australia, the most easterly point, and it's beautiful rainforest, and it's raining today, strangely, again. But it's rainforest down to the ocean where there's great surf, so I get to surf and go for walks in a rainforest. I mean, with my family.
It's a tough life, sir. It's a tough life.
Tough life, mate.
So do me a favor. Tell me about how you first got into this film business in the first place.
Well, it was back in 2005 or 2004, and I flew to Pakistan. I was actually working in the UK as a medic, as a unit nurse on film sets, and was kind of, that nurse that you kind of see in the background every now and then, but is kind of, on set and comes out and gives people Baroccas and pick-me-ups and Band-Aids and paracetamol and so on. But that allowed me a really great opportunity because really there's not a whole lot to do unless you're working on a movie with lots of stunts and so on. But it gave me a great opportunity to get very close to the action and observe films being made, fairly big budget films, down in London and at the studios. And I used to just kind of attach myself to various departments, to the camera department and the wardrobe department, week on week, and learnt from each of those departments, and kind of the heads of those departments kind of took me under their wings and gave me this great opportunity to learn kind of on the job. So in between handing out my headache tablets, I was kind of learning filmmaking, and then this great opportunity came up to go to Pakistan, where I had just been traveling with my girlfriend through the tribal areas along the Afghan border, and came across this incredible town where they manufacture weapons out of scrap metal. So they melt the metal down and they make these replicas of weapons and test fire them in the air in the main street. And it was such a crazy place that I thought, wouldn't this be a fascinating spot to make a film in? And so I wrote a story around a true story of a boy growing up in his father's arms manufacturing workshop, and that became Son of a Lion, my first film. And I went to Pakistan, and I had the Guerrilla Filmmakers Handbook. I don't know whether you remember it.
I remember that book. Absolutely, I remember that book.
You would know it. And I had that in my suitcase, and so I went to Pakistan with the Guerrilla Filmmakers Handbook and ended up shooting this film with a small camera in Pakistan on the Afghan border, and it ended up being selected for the Berlinale and went to all these great prestigious festivals and had a cinema release around the world. So that was kind of my first experience of, wow,
Is that and that's a feature? And that's a feature, right? Or a short?
Feature-length drama. And that kind of solidified for me the possibility that a nobody with, a unit nurse of all people, because my background is paramedicine, I'm a paramedic by trade. That's my background. No film school training. No. That somebody from left of field, an outsider, can pick up a camera, learn from books, and learn by hanging around a film set, and go out and do it. And so that kind of spurred me on to further films.
That's insane. Now, not many people get to go shoot a film in the border of Afghanistan, which we're going to get into the dangers of that in a second with your new film. Now, the new film, Jirga, I pronounced that correctly?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, Jirga. From what I've been able to see, it looks. I saw the trailer of it. It looks fantastic, by the way. It looks beautifully shot. And one of the reasons we have you on the show today is because you have this insane story on how you shot that film. So please enlighten us on how that movie got made.
So Jirga is my latest film, and it's about an Australian soldier who had a tour of a couple of tours of Afghanistan, and his last tour he was involved in a night raid on a village where he accidentally in the course of the battle in this particular village, he accidentally shot a civilian, and killed the civilian, and he's been, hasn't been able to get that out of his head, and has been living with the burden of that guilt, and just makes a very bold decision to return to Afghanistan as a tourist, as a traveller, to try and find that family. So to try and reach that village where he had this raid had taken place, and face the family and essentially apologise to them. So a film of classic redemption story, but told in Kandahar, Afghanistan. And so we being a friend of mine, an actor, Sam Smith from Sydney, we met over coffee in Sydney and worked on this script, getting it right, and then flew to Pakistan to make this film because I'd been in contact with a businessman who was going to put up the money for this feature film in Pakistan. If we were going to shoot in Pakistan along the Afghan border, we could kind of cheat it and shoot there instead. But when we eventually flew to Afghanistan hoping to make this movie, Sam Smith and myself, it turned out that the money was not there. Mainly because the Secret Service had not agreed to issue us permits. They weren't happy with the political element of the film. It was very politically sensitive. And once they vetted the script, they decided that they weren't going to support us. And so they essentially blocked the film from being made, and the investor pulled his money. And so we had nothing to work with there apart from our own personal savings. And that's when we had to make a decision whether to come back with nothing or to buy plane tickets to Afghanistan and try and wing it, which is what we ended up doing. So we had a little bit of crowdfunding, Indiegogo crowdfunding, a bit of personal savings, and some Screen Australia development funding, which is our government funding body down here. They gave us a little bit of development money, mainly for doing a draft of the script, but without telling them, we actually used that to shoot. And so we bought a couple of plane tickets, right. And we bought a camera in a Sony A7s in a shopping mall down in Islamabad, and
that's insane.
And off we went. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Not knowing whether we could pull it off or not, with the odds stacked firmly against us, but willing to give it a go anyway.
I would have completely consulted you against going, without question. That's insane. Well, that's an insane idea.
Alex, you wouldn't have been the only one. I don't know how he got my phone number, but the Australian ambassador in Kabul was phoning me on a regular basis, telling me to get out. We shot most of the film in Jalalabad, which is in the eastern area of Afghanistan. And on the outskirts of Jalalabad, you had, Islamic State, ISIS operating, Taliban, of course. It was a super dangerous part of the country. And an Australian aid worker was pretty much the last Westerner who was in town, and she had been kidnapped 2 days before we arrived. So we kind of rocked up in Jalalabad in this environment where, everyone was tense. The police and the army were tense. I was getting phone calls from the ambassador telling us to get out, shoot the film in Morocco. I said to him, I got no money to even fly to Morocco, let alone shoot a film there. We're going to forge on, And so we just stuck it out and dug our heels in and met a great bunch of local Afghan actors and filmmakers and collaborated with them to tell this story.
That's insane. So what? All right. So you get to Afghanistan with a camera you buy at the mall or at a store somewhere, and with an actor, and you just kind of do you have a script, or is it a scriptment, or how is it? Like where's the story?
Well, I do love a scriptment, and I guess it was probably 80% of the script was that. And the reason being that it's very difficult when you're writing a story like this, when you're trying to put a script together, that involves people from another culture, another country, speaking in a different language, to write those kind of dialogues, especially when you're distant from that. And so a lot of those scenes, we had obviously action and descriptions in the scenes, but we left a lot of the dialogue to the day. There were essential dialogues that were in the script. I think the length of that and the script we went over with was only about 50 pages or 40 pages, so it was pretty slim. But yeah, we had a script, and we just kept reworking it. And there was a real, I love that process, that kind of dynamic process, that we weren't going there with something that we'd written in Australia, 1,000 kilometres away from Afghanistan, putting words in the mouths of local Afghan actors. We needed to be open to what was going to be given to us, and the surprises we were going to come across along the way. And so that was, we left that open. The through line, the arc of the story was always the same from the beginning to the end, but it was just the details along the way and the dialogue that changed, and it was the right approach, I think, because there was so much that we came across that the local actors, the Afghans, helped us with, and suggestions made by them that enriched the story and made it feel all the more authentic.
How did you get local Afghan actors? Like, how does that work? Like, you do a casting call? I doubt it. How did you get these people?
Yeah, you can't kind of do your traditional casting there. We had to be super secretive about what we were doing. We did get permits from the Afghan Film Commission. Okay,
wait, is there an Afghan Film Commission?
Well, it's a dude in a little office in a rundown building. So you could call it that, but really, it's funded by a European NGO, and it's literally 2 or 3 people who are in charge of the Afghan Film Archive, which was which has got which is kind of like held in this super secure building. But Afghanistan has quite a rich history in film that kind of ended with the invasion of the Russians and the war that started in '79, and then of course under the Taliban, there wasn't much of a love for film at that time.
Not so much for the media. No.
No. So, there is this organisation that's been given the task of protecting and preserving and digitising their film stock and their old reel films. So they also give you permits when you want to shoot in the country. They were very suspicious initially because they've been burnt so many times. Westerners coming over, kind of pitching films and documentaries that about the rich culture and the positive side of Afghanistan, and then eventually making films about the oppression or the kind of negative, depressing side of the country. And they were fed up with that. They were really fed up with these depictions of the country that kind of seemed to overlook the rich culture and the beauty of the people and the landscape and all those positive things about Afghanistan. So, but the way they got on board was kind of a bit crazy, because we went and had a meeting. The head of the film commission was very reluctant to give us permits. And then he asked to see my passport. Now, I travel on my German passport. I'm an Australian-German dual national. Mm-hmm. My mother's German. And I, unfortunately, because Australia has participated as a part of the coalition of the willing with the American counterparts in various wars, the feelings towards Australians in many parts of the world are not quite what it used to be. I used to be able to sew a kind of like an Australian flag on my backpack when I was backpacking through Asia, and you'd always get a lot of love from people. It's not quite that way anymore because of our involvement in various conflicts. So I now choose to travel on my German passport. I handed that to him, and he breaks out in German language, this head of the film commission, and it turns out he spends half the year in Germany and then travels to Afghanistan for the other half. And so we started chatting in German. I managed to maintain a little bit of German growing up in Australia, speaking with my mother. So I just kind of chatted to him in German, and I won him over, and he gave us a stamp of approval. Off we went with these permits. So we had that, but you still had to be really secretive because of the risk of kidnapping, of the risk of, particularly around Jalalabad, at that time, there would have been nothing that ISIS would have liked more than to find a couple of Aussie filmmakers to kidnap and hold for ransom. And we were told that we were told that by various people. So we had to keep things kind of on the lowdown. And so how did we get those actors? Well, I knew an Australian artist who lives in Jalalabad and has a little artist collective there. Yes, Australians are crazy, as you already know.
Yes,
but
obviously.
He knew a couple of local filmmakers who make kind of low-budget Pashto films, kind of with a lot of martial arts and gunfights and so on for that market. And so it put us in touch with those guys there, and a lot of them ended up in the film, and we had to work with them quite closely on pulling their performances back a little bit, because the films that they're used to making are quite melodramatic and over the top. And so, once we had worked on that, they were brilliant and a great team, and really important to the process.
That's insane. Now, what was the craziest thing that happened while you were shooting?
Well, I mean, there were, I guess, one that we do mention a bit in terms of giving people an appreciation for the conditions we were working under, was that we had to shoot about 4 days in this incredible location on the outskirts of Jalalabad. So Afghanistan was once, pre-Islamic times, was once a very important part of Gandharan, was actually the kind of center of Gandharan Buddhist culture. And so there are these Buddhist stupas and statues of Buddha and caves and underground monasteries across Afghanistan, but particularly in the east where we were shooting. And on the outskirts of Jalalabad, there was this cave complex. And this is a stone's throw from Tora Bora. You might remember Tora Bora being the place that Osama bin Laden and his Al-Qaeda fighters kind of retreated to prior to crossing back into Pakistan after 9/11. And so these cave complexes were originally carved out by the Buddhists in, I think, 272 BC as part of the Edicts of Ashoka. I mean, they're incredibly well preserved. You've still got Buddhist hand carvings all through these caves. This was the location we shot our. This was the hideout, essentially, that our Taliban commander and his men, who would be holding our hostage, because as you will see, those who see Jirga will see that the Australian soldier is kidnapped about halfway through the film. And so they hold him in this cave complex. So we had to shoot there. But the area is not particularly secure, and you have, as I mentioned, ISIS and Taliban operating mainly at night, but even during the day. And there was one moment when we were proceeding to the set on our third day, and two men were seen coming out of the caves, and they were apprehended by the police and army that we were travelling with, the Afghan National Army, and who then, after interrogating these men, told us that we couldn't shoot there anymore because there was a fear, a suspicion that these two men had planted an IED in the caves for us.
Jesus.
So we, and we still had scenes to shoot. So this is the way we had to operate.
I love this. I know. I mean, there's an attempted murder, but we got stuff to shoot. We got to do things.
We got stuff to shoot here. And so there was, this constant rewriting as well, in response to the circumstances that we were facing and the environment that we were operating in. I guess the way I felt we were operating was a little like a news crew, where we were kind of standing by ready for a moment when it was safe enough to shoot. We were given the thumbs up, and out we went, and we got what we could, and then came back. And yeah, I mean, there were a whole lot of nice to get scenes that we just never managed to film because of this very, very difficult environment.
What I mean, I just have to ask, like, why? Like that's like the question. Why? Why go through? I mean, you're literally risking your life. I mean, I have to ask you as a filmmaker. I mean, I've heard of crazy filmmakers before, and that's fine. I'm a crazy filmmaker myself. I shot a movie at the Sundance Film Festival, which I thought was risky, but Jesus. I mean, this is a whole other world. Why would you go down this road? I'm just trying to get inside the head of the filmmaker that's like, we're going to go into a war zone and we're going to shoot a narrative film. Why not?
Yeah.
Like, what goes through the head?
Well, I think that for me, those environments. I mean, I'm not an adrenaline junkie. Well, at least I don't think I am. Some would call me that, but I think those environments they just keep on giving. They are just full. I mean, you're bringing in elements of reality continuously. Happy accidents, whatever you want to call them. They're and you're when you're making, say you're making a war film. Thousands of kilometers away from the front, it's not going to feel as authentic. Or at least you could get it to feel authentic if you have a big enough budget. We just had such a small budget, so there was no way we couldn't. There's no way we could make this film anywhere else than in the real place, and
right.
And I think I'm not intimidated by those environments. I think a lot of our fear is misplaced. People would disagree. Yes, stuff happens there, and people are killed,
and kidnapped. Okay, it does happen, but at the same time, it also doesn't happen to a lot of people who travel there, and there are locals who live their lives there and raise families there, have children there, and there's a kind of like level of normality even in a place where reading in the news is constantly seeing conflict. So those environments, I'm not intimidated by sitting around in a circle with men wearing turbans and holding AK-47s. That image might, because of the way we've been conditioned, to think, might intimidate and cause people to have a fear response. For me, because I've had previous history in that area, and I know that culturally this is the way the locals live their lives, and in some of those areas that are very remote, they've been leaving the house with a weapon slung over the shoulder for centuries. It's just not a normal part of their daily lives. So there are little things that I guess make me feel I feel comfortable in that environment. I feel comfortable I feel comfortable operating in that environment, Now,
I think,
So when you were shooting this, you're shooting this with basically a camera, and how did you get audio?
Well, the audio was into the camera. And,
so you literally were just like whatever the camera mic was, or whatever the little mic that you had on the camera, that was it?
Yeah, it was the camera that was inbuilt into the Sony A7s was what we used, and it wasn't for it was kind of like necessity. I couldn't actually find an appropriate microphone in Kabul that would fit on top of this at the time. I mean, and so we were kind of forced to record sound into the camera. So I do a kind of master shot, and then I get closer, or I do it the other way around. But I'd always get at least one take very close to the subject, so that I'd get reasonable audio. But of course, in the end, in the very costly post-production process, a lot of that audio was replaced. Not the Afghan dialogue, but but certainly the dialogue from the lead character was replaced, and a lot of the environmental sounds, and there was a lot of money spent on cleaning up that audio.
It's insane. I mean, the story that you're saying is pretty much, it's crazy. It's a crazy, crazy story. But it shows the passion of the filmmaker. It's a passion that you wanted to tell this story. And it's paid off for you because the film was the official submission to the Oscars from Australia, which is an insane accomplishment. You won a bunch of awards at the Australian Oscars. And you also got into TIFF, the Toronto Film Festival, which is no easy feat. And now it's going to get released here in the States soon?
It is in July. Jirga's coming to the States in July, and if it's something that that listeners are keen to see on the big screen, I can always contact their local cinema and ask them to book it through Lightyear Entertainment, who are releasing it. But it's funny that when you're on a mountainside in Afghanistan shooting this, and believe me, I had many moments over there where I thought this is just not going to work out, and what are we doing? This is crazy, But you're having a shot at it, and but there's this constant self-doubt, but there's always that little, for me, there's always that little sliver of light of possibility that it could come to something. It wasn't like, you're not over there thinking, yeah, we've got it. But there were several moments when we were shooting, when what we were shooting was working out really beautifully, and we were given these golden moments that were unscripted and that really, really made the film. And they're the kind of moments that kind of spurred us on and really gave us a bit of a push, thinking that maybe this is so unique, as in very few films come out of Afghanistan at all, let alone feature drama films. That this is something special. It's something special. This is reality. This is a real look at, because the script was constantly being assessed and discussed by the Afghans we were with. So in terms of authenticity, this is right down there with, you want an insight into Afghanistan now. This film really does that. And I think people have responded to that. They've responded to how real it feels. And because we drew in all those elements. But yeah, when you're over there and you're in that moment, you've just got to kind of keep going and not really think of so much of, worry so much about where it's going to end up, or is it going to work, or is anyone going to see this? Are we even going to be able to get post-production funding? It's, you just kind of you go, go along for the ride and let it kind of sweep you up and take you on that journey, because it felt like that. It felt like we were kind of being propelled along by something, as if we were, doing something that we only had a little bit of control over, but it was a journey that we were meant to be on, and this beautiful collaboration that formed between the Afghans and us, and in that environment, that something magical was happening,
Now, how many days did you take to shoot the film?
We took, I think, calculated it to be about 22 days. That wasn't successive days shooting,
Sure.
But and some days the security was didn't allow us to, wasn't conducive to shooting safely enough. So and in those times we were kind of holed up in our safe house and discussing scenes and working on rewrites, and so there's this amazing thing, the opportunity that a lot of, I guess, traditional film productions don't have, where we were living together in very close quarters,
right,
under very trying conditions, but using that to our advantage, using every moment to our advantage. And I think that there's a beauty in that. There's a beauty in being a small crew, and just being so flexible and able to kind of move at the drop of a hat, and getting to know each other really well, especially under that kind of pressure, And it almost felt like we were we were kind of like we were at war together in this, and like people who have gone to war, they make these bonds. Soldiers make bonds with each other, and there's something special there that's some history there they have that that only they will ever understand. So it was kind of like that, working under pressure with that crew that made the film all the better.
Well, I'll tell you what, man. I want to congratulate you on being an inspiration to everybody listening right now to this episode, because you basically are the definition of indie film hustle. That's no question about that. I mean, you grabbed the camera, you wanted to go tell a story, you went into a hostile environment to tell that story for yourself, and you didn't get caught up with like, oh, I need a red camera, or I need these many people, I need this kind of crew. You're like, look, this is what I got, this is the situation I have, and I'm going to go out and make a movie.
Yeah.
Period.
Well, I think people wait for certain, as you mentioned, certain equipment or certain budget or certain
actors,
team or certain place. Or, there's a lot of obstacles. I think that a lot of people put up to their own to making their own dreams a reality. And I would say, if you want to do it, you just go out and do it, and find a way to do it, to get around those obstacles. And I think that process, it's like a test. It's like the very journey, the very test that your protagonist goes through to achieve his or her goal in the film it kind of mirrors the challenge of making the film itself. And just as your protagonist gets the Holy Grail by getting around these obstacles, a film making experience shouldn't come easy either. It's a similar pattern. It's a similar kind of formula, and that's the way I saw it in Afghanistan. And Sam was the same, and the Afghan actors. Every time we were thrown an obstacle that we thought, oh, gee, how are we going to get around that? That's going to be the end of this. That's going to be the end of the shoot. The film's never going to come to anything. We realised that, no, hang on a second. How can we have a protagonist who gets thrown these obstacles and has to get around them? But we can't find a way. We must find a way. We are taking the same journey as our hero is, and so once we kind of accepted that, then those obstacles actually became really wonderful challenges that we embraced, and they actually started to excite me. It excited me when we came up against a wall. I'm like, how am I going to get around this? This is great. Let's find a way. Let's make something happen here. And it was almost as if, we were living this parallel kind of journey.
Benjamin, you are an inspiration, sir. So thank you so much for telling us your story. And I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests. What advice would you give a filmmaker trying to break into the business today?
Well, I reckon, making a film is like a scientific medical experiment, You've just got to give it a go. You don't get caught up too much on, what the outcome's going to be. So I think resist the fear of failure, because, I think that if you see failure as a growth mindset, as something that is not necessarily a negative thing, that it can actually be part of you growing and you becoming better at what you do, then I think that gives you a certain freedom. If you don't fear the failure, then you will embark on the journey, because what have you got to lose, right?
Fair enough.
So you've got to make peace with failure,
Oh, failure is the best teacher, isn't it?
Best teacher, and I'm comfortable with low probabilities of success. I have to be comfortable with that, because that allows me to succeed, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Now, what is the book that had the biggest impact on your life or career?
Oh my Lord. It's okay. The book that's had the most impact. I haven't read it for years, and it kind of, it feels strange saying it, but someone said to me the other day, I was over in LA having a meeting, and they said, look, you write into these redemption films. What's going on? Maybe you need to see a counsellor. And they said, did you have some kind of like heavy religious upbringing? And it wasn't really religious upbringing, but yeah, I mean, look, my father was a Protestant minister, or an Anglican minister, and so I studied the Bible early on. I don't classify myself as a Christian. I've lived in Buddhist monasteries, and obviously I've been championing the Muslim cause for years. But I think in terms of like influencing my work and my objective of promoting peace in the world and non-violence, I think that I think the Bible, at least the New Testament, probably has had the most impact on what I'm trying to do with my work in making the world a better place. Absolutely.
Fair enough. Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
Ooh, right. I think that making space to think, and I believe that right now in this moment in time, that is becoming more and more important. Making time to reflect and to think. I feel myself constantly reaching for something to read, something to look at, something to stimulate my mind. But where I have found my greatest original ideas and inspiration has actually been in moments of stillness, where I am just sitting and being and thinking, and in a quiet place, and not looking for something to stimulate myself the whole time, and just being in that moment of silence. So making those moments of quietness to reflect. Excellent.
And what is 3 of your favorite films of all time?
Wow. Okay. In This World, Michael Winterbottom. I do like his work a lot. Salam Bombay was very influential on me. It's Mira Nair. And I suppose The Mission. And
that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. But yeah, I mean, look, I could keep going with other examples, but they were films I saw early on. We never really had a TV growing up, so I came to film very late in the piece, in my late teens or mid to late teens, and so they were films I saw pretty early on that made an impression.
Now, where can people find you and your work?
Well, via my website, benjamingilmour.com, and I'm an author of several books as well, quite a few of them, memoirs about my journey making films, Warrior Poets about making Son of a Lion in Pakistan, and most recently Cameras and Kalashnikovs about making Jirga in Afghanistan. And
are those available on Amazon here in the States or just in Australia?
Yeah, they should be. Cameras and Kalashnikovs is a limited release. There may be still some copies out there online, but it's limited release. But I've got another book coming out in September called The Gap, so look out for that one.
Very, very cool, my friend. Listen, again, you are an inspiration, Benjamin, so thank you again so much for being on the show and dropping some inspiration on the tribe today.
Right, my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Alex.
Again, I want to thank Benjamin for coming on the show and dropping some major inspiration on the Indie Film Hustle tribe today. So I truly, truly appreciate it, Benjamin. Please stay safe out there. Don't do movies like this anymore. But hey, man, if you got to do it, you got to do it, man. It's people like you that give everybody else the courage and the inspiration to go out there and make your film no matter what. So thank you again. And if you want links to anything we spoke about in this episode, please head over to indiefilmhustle.com/329 for the show notes. And if you haven't already, please head over to shootingforthemob.com and pick up a copy of my new book of the same name, Shooting for the Mob, about how I almost made a $20 million feature film for the mob and my journeys through Hollyweird, meeting big movie stars, billion-dollar producers, all while trying to survive dealing with gangsters and making a film. It is a allegory of what not to do when chasing your filmmaking dream. Just head over to shootingforthemob.com. And that does it for another episode of the Indie Film Hustle podcast. As always, keep that hustle going, keep that dream alive, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.